Welcome to Rising Up for Justice, a special weekly series presented by Rising Up with Sonali, an independently produced, subscriber-supported program syndicated to radio stations, free speech TV, and podcast platforms. I'm SonaliKolhatkar, host and executive producer. Our nation and our world are overrun by billionaires and bigots, but they are few and we are many. On this series, exclusive to subscribers of Rising Up with Sonali and viewers of Free Speech TV, we'll hear from organizers in the movements for social justice and dig into the nuts and bolts of values, strategies, tactics, narratives, and building power. This week on Rising Up for Justice, EmilyMartin, Chief Program Officer for the National Women's Law Center, joins us. She leads the development and execution of NWLC's gender justice priorities with a particular focus on women and girls of color and LGBTQI+ people. She was previously the National Women's Law Center's Vice President for Education and Workplace Justice. Welcome to the program, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tell me first what the goals are of the National Women's Law Center. The name certainly suggests a lot, but looking through your website, it's very broad. So how do you define what your main goals are?
Well, it's a great question. We are a multi-issue gender justice organization. We're focused on law and policy, but also on narrative change. The issues that we focus on include education, workplace justice, reproductive rights and health, childcare, income security, judicial nominations, and democracy, among other things. So a whole bunch of issues that are really key to women and LGBTQ people's ability to make decisions about their lives and to thrive. And we work on those issues. We often say that we use the law in all its forms. We really believe that legal change drives culture change, and culture change drives legal change. We engage with Congress, with state legislatures, with the courts. And we also do a lot of campaign and communications work, both because that's really important for our ability to advance good policies and fight against bad ones, and because more broadly, sort of helping to shift and shape how people think about gender, how people think about opportunity, what are the stories that we tell ourselves about women and girls and LGBTQ people. That's also sort of key to our ability to advance gender justice.
I want to talk a little bit about the definition of what you mean by gender justice, because, of course, it is such a fraught issue these days, primarily because we've seen these patriarchal attacks that go hand in hand with white supremacy and Trumpism, and they've made such an issue around gender, not just in trying to kind of recreate what so-called traditional roles are for women, but also the definition of who gets to identify as a woman, particularly honing attacks on transgender communities. How does the National Women's Law Center define gender justice in this framework, within this, moment that we're living in?
It's a great question. It's a big question, but some of the things that we are really clear on. One is when we are fighting for gender justice, that means ensuring that nobody's life is constrained by expectations around gender, about who you can be, what you can accomplish based on the fact that you're a woman or based on the fact that you were assigned female at birth, that people should have the full opportunities to live and to succeed and to thrive without being constrained by other people's expectations around gender. That means, among other things, that our fight for gender justice is very much a fight around trans inclusion and for the rights of trans people generally, for trans women and girls specifically, because we think this is all one fight. Right now, we're seeing such demonization and such frightening attacks on trans women and girls. That is appalling in its own right. It is also a set of attacks that we think put all women and girls at risk, because really one of the things that we're seeing in this moment from the Trump administration and its allies is a real insistence that they can use the power of government to ensure that you live a life according to their ideas of gender. And that is fundamentally what we're opposed to.
Give me a little bit of the history of the National Women's Law Center. How long ago was the Law Center founded, and has its approach evolved as the times have evolved?
Yeah. So we were founded in 1972. We're more than 50 years old. When we were founded, the Law Center began as a project at the Center for Law and Social Policy, which is still an organization that's around. It's a public interest law firm. It works on a variety of issues, including a lot of issues related to income security and poverty. And in 1972, the women who worked there, who I believe at the time were mostly administrative staff and law students, came together and made some demands of management. Of course, this was at the height of the second wave women's movement. They came to management of the Center for Law and Social Policy and said that they wanted higher pay. They didn't want to be expected to make coffee every day. And they wanted the Center of Law and Social Policy to establish a formal women's rights program. So the Center for Law and Social Policy agreed and hired the first full-time women's rights attorney in Washington, D.C., Marcia Greenberger, who was one of our co-founders. Marcia Greenberger's first project that they assigned her was to write a memo on whether there was enough work to do in 1972 around women's rights to keep one attorney busy working full-time. She came up with a lot of work that needed to be done. At that time, what was the Women's Rights Project of CLASP, of the Center for Law and Social Policy, focused on education. It was the same year Title IX had passed, on employment, and on healthcare. This was very shortly after Roe v. Wade was decided. So for sure, there are many common threads between the work that National Women's Law Center initially did and the work that we do today. Our other co-founder, Duffy Campbell, came on board a couple years later, bringing a deep expertise in poverty law, which we continue to be deeply engaged around in our work around income security. And so for sure, we have grown over the years. It was one attorney at the beginning. Now we're about 120 folks in DC. And the work that we have done has become more complicated and has expanded in a lot of ways. We do much more communications and narrative work than we used to. We do a lot more work in the States. But that core set of commitments, that core set of beliefs that that law and policy is key to ensuring that that women really have equal opportunities, that they really have freedom in their lives, and that is something that deserves specific focus and that deserves deep care and analysis is sort of a common thread through the National Women's Law Center's work over the past 50 odd years. I think I definitely recognize the organization that we are today in the work that began in 1972. I think another thing that is really a common thread through the decades of the work is that we have always done this work in close coalition. Part of the way that we are able to have successes is that we really are always thinking about what are the other organizations, what are the other movements that we're partnering with, and ensuring that we are building strength in that way. And that's also been key to how we work from the very beginning.
And I definitely want to ask you about the organizations that you're you're allied with. But in terms of what National Women's Law Center does today, let's talk about the ways in which you work to achieve your goals. Obviously, Litigation Law Center. So you're engaged in leading lawsuits, and you were also talking about narrative change. But let's focus on the lawsuits. What are some of the big legal fights you're engaged in? I imagine it's not just around transgender rights, bathroom laws, etc., but also access to reproductive care, which is such an important and crucial issue today. So take us through some of that work, the legal work.
Well, I will say in this administration, we have really leaned into our litigation role because I think that is such a critical set of skills and tools and strategies in this moment. So there's a variety of ways that we engage in the courts. Some of the cases that we're really paying a lot of attention to are some challenges to the administration's attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and using this sort of anti-DEI hysteria to really attempt to roll back programs and laws, legal protections that have been key to women's success at work and beyond. So with partners, we are litigating in a few lawsuits, one challenging restrictions placed on Department of Labor grants, where organizations receiving money from the Department of Labor had to promise that they wouldn't engage in DEI, and DEI wasn't really defined at all. We are representing a group called Chicago Women in Trades, a longtime partner we've worked with for decades, that works to equip women to enter the skilled trades, construction and electricians and plumbing, all jobs where women are still radically underrepresented, but high-paying jobs. So the Chicago Women in Trades works to give women the skills to enter that work. They particularly work with women of color. And so this anti-DEI pledge that the administration was requiring them to sign really went to the heart of their mission, the heart of their work, and threatened it. So we are representing them in what has so far been a successful fight, challenging the legality of that anti-DEI pledge. And there is a national injunction now preventing the Department of Labor from requiring that pledge from grantees. We have a somewhat similar pair of cases on behalf of domestic violence and sexual assault organizations across the country who, in order to get federal funding from the Department of Justice, from the Department of Health and Human Services, from HUD, also had to sign these pledges that they wouldn't engage in gender ideology or DEI, even though statutorily they're required to make special efforts to reach underserved communities. They're required to serve everyone regardless of gender identity, including trans women. And so we are representing those domestic violence and sexual assault organizations who are being threatened with loss of the federal funding, which is what holds up all of the infrastructure addressing the needs of domestic violence victims, of sexual assault survivors. So we are in legal fights around the administration's ability to impose those restrictions on those organizations. And again, so far, we are winning. We also represent individual women in various legal fights. So we represent a woman who was denied emergency abortion care by a religiously affiliated hospital in California when she went to the hospital with a medical emergency that required an abortion for her to be safe. They said, go to the hospital many miles away. Here's a bucket and some towels in case something happens in the car. So we are proud to represent her, challenging that hospital and the hospital system for their failure to follow California laws requiring emergency abortion care. We recently had a great settlement on behalf of LGBTQ people seeking fertility care who, under a policy that Aetna had to pay out of pocket for IUI care before they could get IVF care, while straight couples had that IUI care, that intrauterine insemination, artificial insemination care covered. And then if it didn't work out, then they had IVF care covered. So we successfully sued Aetna and won a settlement that enables LGBTQ couples to get access to the same fertility care that straight couples have access to. So those are some of our examples, some examples of the cases that we're engaged in, both against the Trump administration, but also representing individuals who are facing discrimination or denial of reproductive health care in other contexts.
So let's talk about the narrative work, because that's so important in this time when, as I was saying earlier, there's just so much propaganda around the definition of gender justice and around people's autonomy to identify as the gender of their choice, and just the roles that women, men, and trans folks are expected to play. What is the work? How does National Women's Law Center engage in narrative work, and why is that so important for you?
Yeah, I mean, to go to the why, the narrative work really shapes so much of what people care about and believe and show up for. It's how people understand the world. It's how people understand what's fair. It's how people understand what's possible. And so some examples of work that we have done and are doing in this moment. One of the things that we've been digging into is the pronatalist movement, which is, of course, this right-wing movement to push women to have more babies, and mostly to push white women to have more babies, to come down hard on single women who are disproportionately women of color who have kids, but to really try to create a lot of incentives and subtle and less subtle pushes for women to marry early and have babies early. So we've seen the Heritage Foundation, who is, of course, behind Project 2025, with a new report urging all sorts of policy changes to push women into marriage, to keep women in marriages by making divorce harder, and to push early and frequent childbearing. We see it from folks like Elon Musk and other kind of people from the right on the tech side who are very interested in sort of a eugenics approach of making super babies and having as many babies as possible from the folks that they consider desirable. So, and all of this pronatalist effort really threatens women's ability to continue to fully participate in public life, because you don't have to push very hard on these pronatalist movements to figure out that they're very interested in restricting access to contraception and abortion, that there's a lot of hostility to women's rights to have higher education and to succeed in the workplace, because when you go and get your degrees and when you are having a successful career, you're probably less likely to have 5 babies. And so one example of the work that we're doing right now is to be telling the story of what they mean when they say prenatalism. What does that potentially impact? And also really thinking about, why is it appealing to so many people? Why is this sort of trad wife moment getting some traction? And what is the story that we at the National Women's Law Center and our partners can be telling that both responds to the fact, I think, that some people are interested in this vision of maybe I just get married and have lots of babies and that is a good life, that there are things that are real that people may be reacting to when they're attracted to that vision, that there are things about the quality of jobs that are available in the economy. There are things about the sense of uncertainty and insecurity that many people are feeling as they look at their income, as they look at their life, that this sort of idealized vision of going back to a time that never quite existed, that vision is feeding something. And so what is the way that we can speak to that vision by enlisting people in an effort to build workplaces and an economy that provides the sort of security and stability and opportunity that folks think that maybe is not possible. And that is sort of feeding this notion that you have to pull back completely from public life in order to find joy and fulfillment. So both doing the work to name what does pronatalism potentially mean for women's legal rights, and how are these efforts really threatening to sort of core foundational understandings we have about legal protections and fairness, but also trying to speak to the concerns that are bringing people into this movement.
Where does National Women's Law Center fit within the kind of universe of social justice work? We were talking earlier about the importance of allying with other organizations. I imagine LGBTQI plus rights groups, but probably even like labor organizations. I'm thinking of groups like the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Who are some of the groups you ally with, and where does the work fit within the broader universe of social justice?
Well, all the groups you mentioned, for sure, are some of our partners and allies. I mean, I think a few things. One, because we're multi-issue, we work closely with a lot of different parts of the progressive movement. So sort of traditional women's rights groups, civil rights groups, and racial justice groups, anti-poverty groups and leaders, LGBTQ organizations, reproductive rights and justice organizations, big progressive mobilization efforts like Indivisible, organizations that are focused on the rule of law and the role of judges like Alliance for Justice and the Brennan Center and Demand Justice, organizations focused on healthcare access and education access, organizations focused on gender-based violence or on childcare and elder care. So one of our strengths, I think, is as a hub across tables and movements, because there are so many places where we're in deep coalition with different nodes of the progressive movement. And that includes state level work as well as national work. For example, we, over the past couple of years, have piloted something called a state gender policy collective, bringing together state lawmakers and state-based organizations that are committed to gender justice and providing them technical assistance and resources and the opportunity to learn from each other across state lines. So thinking about both the national landscape, but also the landscape in the states. And the role we play, in addition to being connectors across issues and having an ability to build like new alliances, because we're not just working on childcare, we're also working on abortion, and how should those groups be in conversation with each other. We, in some ways, are lawyers for the women's movement, that we bring, yes, the litigating capacity, also the ability to do the deep legal analysis of the regulations and the legislation, and the ability to make sure that we're accomplishing what we're setting out to accomplish, the ability to issue spot and to help mobilize to fight back against threats that might be hidden in a lot of dense legalese, and to make clear, what does this mean for you? What's at stake? Who is potentially impacted by this? And how can we come together to push back? So we're in a lot of conversations, and I think that's really our strength, that we have the ability to make the connections between issues and between movements.
And then how can progressive-minded people get involved? I mean, I imagine that your organization, it doesn't sound like the National Women's Law Center is necessarily a membership organization, but I imagine you can use the support or even help amplifying the narrative work on social media. What are ways in which people can get involved if they support what you're doing?
They should go to our website, which is www.nwlc.org. They should sign up for our action alerts. We will give you lots of information about what's happening and what it means and how you can weigh in and make your voice heard, whether it's calling your member of Congress, whether it's writing a comment on a proposed regulation, whether it's, adding your name to a petition. And I will say that in this moment, it can be hard to feel like that matters. Sometimes it feels like, why bother to send the Trump administration a comment saying what you're doing is bad? They're going to do it anyway. They might do it anyway. But one of the challenges right now is to ensure that people keep showing up, because even when we lose, it matters when we can come together and make that effort hard for the other side to undertake. Our resistance matters. Even if we lose that battle, it slows down the next bad thing. It demonstrates the difficulty of continuing down that path. And so folks should sign up for our action alerts and take action that way. They should follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky and LinkedIn, where we also share lots of information about what's happening and what it means and why it matters. So there are lots of ways to plug in, to stand up for what you believe in and what's right in this moment. And we are really eager to help folks do just that.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Emily, for joining us today and spending this time educating us on the work that your organization is doing. Good luck to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
My guest has been EmilyMartin, Chief Program Officer for the National Women's Law Center. And this is Rising Up for Justice. I'm SonaliKolhatkar, host and executive producer of this weekly half-hour series exclusive to viewers of Free Speech TV and subscribers of my long-standing program, Rising Up with Sonali. You can find out more at risingupwithsonali.com.